I stood at the edge of Cascade National Park, taking in the familiar scent of pine and damp earth that had been part of my life since I could remember. The morning mist hung between the trees, not yet burned away by the sun. This place was more than just where I worked. It was home, in the deepest sense. My dad used to bring me here when I was just a kid, his big hand wrapped around my small one, as we hiked trails that seemed endless to my young legs. "This forest has been here longer than any of us," he'd tell me, "and it'll be here long after we're gone." Back then, I believed the trees were listening to us. I adjusted my ranger hat and checked my watch. Time to start my morning patrol. As I walked the perimeter path, my boots crunched on the gravel, a sound that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. 22 years had passed since I'd first started exploring these woods, and somehow I'd never really left. The memories came back easily as I walked, Dad pointing out different types of moss, teaching me how to identify animal tracks, showing me which berries were safe to eat and which weren't. He'd been a ranger here for 30 years before retiring to Arizona, and I'd grown up with the park as my backyard. There were darker memories, too. The ghost stories Dad and the other rangers would tell around campfires during staff retreats, tales of hikers who wandered off trails and were never seen again, and the mysterious man under the trees who supposedly lured people deep into the forest. As a kid, those stories terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. When I turned 18 and had to decide what to do with my life, following in Ricky Barnes's footsteps seemed as natural as breathing. I couldn't imagine working anywhere but here, among these ancient trees that had watched over my childhood. But there was one memory that surfaced now, sharper than the others. I was 12, exploring a remote section of Timber Creek Trail, while Dad was busy with a maintenance task nearby. I'd wandered off the path, something he'd warned me never to do, and found myself facing an enormous Douglas fir, its trunk wider than any tree I'd seen before. Built into the base of that massive tree was a small wooden door, about 2 feet high, with strange symbols carved around its frame. It looked like something from a fairy tale, and I'd reached out to touch it when Dad's voice cut through the forest. I'd never seen my father move so fast. He grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the tree with enough force to scare me. His face had gone pale, his usual calm completely gone. "Don't ever touch that door," he'd said, his voice shaking. "Don't even look at it. And never ever talk about it to anyone. Do you understand me, Dallas?" I nodded, too frightened by his reaction to ask questions. On the walk back to the ranger station, he made me promise again to forget what I'd seen. It was the only time I could remember my father being genuinely afraid of something in the forest he loved. For years afterward, I told myself he'd just been worried I'd get hurt. Maybe the door led to an old maintenance tunnel that wasn't safe, or perhaps it was some kind of protected historical site. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. The look in his eyes had been pure fear. I kept my promise, though. I never mentioned the door to anyone, and I'd managed to avoid that section of Timber Creek Trail for the past 22 years. Whenever assignments came up that would take me near there, I'd find ways to trade with other rangers. No one ever questioned it. We all had our favorite and least favorite parts of the park. The forest had shaped who I was in ways both obvious and subtle. I knew every trail, creek, and ridge like the lines on my palm, but that door, and my father's inexplicable terror, had haunted the edges of my thoughts for decades. My radio crackled, pulling me from my thoughts. "Dallas, you copy?" Ranger Thelma Cox's voice came through clearly. I unclipped the radio from my belt. "I copy, Thelma. What's up?" "We've got reports of unauthorized campers near Timber Creek. Looks like they might have crossed into the restricted area. Can you check it out?" A cold feeling settled in my stomach at the mention of Timber Creek. After all these years of avoiding that area, it seemed the forest wasn't going to let me keep my distance any longer. "Yeah, I'm on it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Heading that way now. Thanks. Let me know what you find. I clipped the radio back to my belt and changed direction, heading toward the northwest section of the park. The dread building inside me felt silly. I was a grown man, a professional park ranger with over a decade of experience. Whatever had scared my father all those years ago was probably nothing more than an old maintenance access point that wasn't up to code. But as I hiked toward Timber Creek, the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger with each step, a premonition I couldn't shake. I tried to dismiss it as irrational, a product of childhood fears and too many campfire stories, but it clung to me like the morning mist among the trees. I pushed through dense underbrush with Tony Jackson at my side, following the barely visible trail that led toward the unauthorized campsite. Each step took me closer to the part of Cascade National Park I'd sworn to avoid, the part that had haunted my dreams since I was 12 years old. My mouth felt dry. Man, these kids picked about the most inconvenient spot possible, Tony said, ducking under a low-hanging branch. You'd think they'd at least choose somewhere with easier access. I nodded without really hearing him. My mind was stuck on the radio call from Thelma. Timber Creek. Of all the places in the park where teenagers could trespass, they had to choose Timber Creek. You okay? Tony asked, glancing over at me. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, I lied. Just thinking about how we're going to handle this. Tony shrugged. Same as always. Document everything, give them a citation, escort them out. Though I'm more concerned about why they're in a restricted area. That's not your typical teenage camping trip. He was right. The northwest section had been off limits to the public for decades. The official reason was habitat protection for several endangered species. But I'd always wondered if there were other reasons. Reasons connected to what my father had shown me all those years ago. The trail widened slightly as we approached a small clearing. Through gaps in the trees, I spotted the telltale orange of camping tents. My heart rate picked up, though not from the hike. There it is, Tony said, pointing ahead. The campsite came into full view as we stepped into the clearing. 3 orange tents formed a triangle around a smoldering campfire. Empty food wrappers, soda cans, and other trash littered the ground. A portable speaker sat on a log beside the fire, and several backpacks were propped against the tents. Looks like they've been here a while, Tony said, pulling out his phone to take pictures for documentation. I scanned the campsite, noting the trampled vegetation and multiple paths leading away from the clearing. One path in particular caught my eye. A narrow trail heading northwest toward the massive Douglas fir I remembered from my childhood. Hello, Tony called out. National Park Service? Anyone here? No response. The campsite appeared temporarily abandoned. Let's document everything before they get back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Check the tents, see if there's any ID or anything that might tell us who we're dealing with. While Tony investigated the tents, I examined the campfire. It had been burning recently, within the last hour, and the ashes contained remnants of food packaging. These kids weren't just camping illegally. They were creating a serious fire hazard. Got some stuff here, Tony called from one of the tents. Looks like high school kids based on some notebooks. One has Miles Finley written inside the cover. The name meant nothing to me, but at least we had an identity to work with. I continued documenting the site, noting the beer cans among the trash. Underage drinking on top of trespassing in a restricted area. These kids were racking up violations. A twig snapped in the forest behind me. I turned to see 4 teenagers emerging from the trees, their expressions shifting from carefree to concerned when they spotted us. "Aw, crap," one of them muttered. A tall blonde boy with an expensive-looking jacket and a confident stance despite being caught red-handed. "Good afternoon," I said, adopting my official ranger tone. "I'm Ranger Barnes and this is Ranger Jackson. You're in a restricted area of Cascade National Park." The blonde boy, who I assumed was Miles Finley based on his apparent leadership role, stepped forward with an easy smile. "Hey there, Rangers. We didn't see any signs saying this area was off limits. There are clearly marked boundaries on all park maps and signs at every trail entrance," I replied. "This entire section is restricted. No public access allowed." A girl with auburn hair braided down her back looked genuinely concerned. "Miles, you said this was just an off-trail spot, not a restricted area." Miles waved his hand dismissively. "Come on, Jackie. It's all the same forest. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," Tony interjected, "is that restricted areas are restricted for a reason, usually for your safety or to protect sensitive habitat." I looked at each teenager in turn, assessing them. Besides Miles and the auburn-haired girl, there was another girl with curly black hair pulled into a ponytail and a boy with glasses who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "We need your names," I said, pulling out my notebook. The nervous boy with glasses spoke up first. "I'm Oliver Mitchell." "Jacqueline Meyer," said the auburn-haired girl. "Margaret Castillo," the other girl added. "Miles Finley," the blonde boy said with a smirk. "And we were just having a little camping trip. No harm done. You're trespassing in a restricted area, creating a fire hazard, and based on what I'm seeing, consuming alcohol while underage," I said. "That's quite a bit of harm. You'll need to pack up your things immediately. We're escorting you out of here." Miles crossed his arms. "Look, Ranger Barnes, we're just trying to have some fun before college starts. Cut us some slack." "This isn't negotiable," I said firmly. "Pack your things now." Jacqueline and Oliver immediately moved toward the tents, but Miles remained defiant. "You Rangers are so uptight," he said. "What are you protecting out here anyway? It's not like there's anything special about this part of the forest." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What do you mean by that?" Miles's smirk widened, sensing he'd hit a nerve. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe the weird little door we found yesterday." My stomach dropped. No, it couldn't be. After all these years. "What door?" Tony asked, looking confused. Miles pointed northwest, exactly in the direction I'd been dreading. The one built into that massive tree about a quarter-mile that way. "Super weird. Looks ancient." "You found a door in a tree?" Margaret asked, looking at Miles with surprise. "You never mentioned that to us." "Oliver and I checked it out yesterday while you girls were swimming at the creek," Miles said. "It was locked or stuck or something, but I managed to get it open." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My father's words echoed in my memory. Never touch it. Never look at it. Never talk about it. "Show me," I said, my voice barely audible. Tony gave me a puzzled look. "Dallas, we should get them packed up and—" "Show me the door," I repeated, louder this time, staring directly at Miles. Miles seemed pleased by my reaction. "Sure thing, Ranger. It's pretty cool, actually. Follow me." He started down the northwest path with a cocky stride. I followed, my legs moving automatically while my mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Tony and the other teenagers trailed behind us, confused by the sudden change in plans. The forest grew denser as we followed Miles along the narrow trail. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in thin beams, creating patches of light on the forest floor. The air felt cooler here, almost unnaturally so, and the typical forest sounds seemed muted. "It's just up ahead," Miles said, pointing to a massive shape looming in the distance. And there it was, the enormous Douglas fir from my childhood nightmares. It stood at least 300 feet tall, its trunk wider than any other tree in the area. The bark was deeply furrowed, creating natural shadows that seemed to writhe in the dappled light. "Check it out," Miles said proudly, walking up to the base of the tree and pointing at a small wooden structure built into the trunk. My blood ran cold. The door, exactly as I remembered it. Small, about 2 feet high, made of dark wood that didn't match the tree. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, symbols that seemed to shift slightly if you looked at them too long. But there was one crucial difference from my memory. The door was open. Miles had pried it open somehow, and now it hung ajar, revealing a dark opening that seemed to lead down into the earth beneath the tree. A cool draft emerged from the opening, carrying a strange, musty smell I couldn't identify. "I got it open yesterday," Miles boasted, oblivious to my horror. "There's a tunnel inside. Goes down pretty deep from what I could tell." "You went inside?" I asked, my voice strangled. "Just a little way," Miles said. "It was getting dark, and I didn't have a good flashlight. Thought I'd go back today with better gear." Tony stepped forward, peering at the door with curiosity. "What the hell is this? Some kind of maintenance access?" "No," I said more sharply than I intended. "Don't touch it." Miles laughed. "What's the big deal? It's just some old door. Probably used by the CCC back in the 30s or something." I couldn't take my eyes off the open door. My father's fear made perfect sense now. Whatever was behind that door, whatever led down into the darkness beneath the tree, was never meant to be disturbed. "Get away from the tree," I ordered, my ranger authority returning through the haze of fear. "All of you. Now." "But—" Miles started to protest. "Now!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the forest. The teenagers jumped at my outburst. Even Miles seemed taken aback by my vehemence. "Everyone back to the campsite," Tony said, taking charge while giving me a concerned look. "Let's get your things packed up." As the group retreated, I remained frozen, staring at the open door. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. 22 years of avoiding this place, of keeping my promise to my father, and now the door was open. Whatever my father had feared was now accessible. "Dallas?" Tony's voice seemed to come from far away. "What's going on? What is that thing?" I couldn't explain. Not now. Maybe not ever. "We need to get these kids out of here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Back to the station, now." Tony nodded, though his expression showed he had 1,000 questions. I forced myself to turn away from the door, to follow the path back to the campsite where the teenagers were hastily packing their gear. My mind raced with memories of my father's warning as I helped the teenagers break down their tents. His pale face, his shaking hands, his insistence that I never touch the door, never look at it, never talk about it. For the first time in my life, I fully understood his fear. My hands kept shaking as I filled out the violation report forms. I'd had to start over twice already when my pen smeared across the page. The fluorescent lights of the ranger station made everything look too harsh, too bright. Tony sat at the desk across from mine, typing up his own account of what we'd found. The 4 teenagers waited on the bench against the wall. 3 of them looked properly chastened. Margaret kept her eyes on the floor. Oliver fidgeted with his glasses, and Jacqueline stared out the window. But Miles leaned back with his arms stretched across the bench, that smirk still plastered on his face. "So what's the deal with that little door anyway?" he called out, loud enough to make me flinch. "Some kind of maintenance thing? Secret ranger clubhouse?" I kept writing, pressing the pen harder against the paper than necessary. "Seriously," Miles continued. "You acted like we found your secret stash or something. What's the big deal about an old door?" Tony glanced at me, eyebrows raised. I knew he had questions too, but at least he had the sense not to ask them here. "The deal," I said, looking up from my paperwork, "is that you were in a restricted area, restricted for your safety." "Yeah, but why is it restricted? That's what I'm asking." I put my pen down and turned to face him fully. Cascade has over 300,000 acres. Less than a quarter is open to the public. The rest is protected wilderness, dangerous terrain, or ecologically sensitive areas. "That doesn't answer my question," Miles said. "I don't owe you answers." I picked up their violation forms. "You 4 trespassed in a clearly marked restricted zone. lit an illegal fire during fire season, and had alcohol while underage. Those are the facts that matter. I handed each of them their copy of the citation. These violations come with fines. Information about payment is included. You're lucky we're not pressing additional charges. Oliver took his paper with a shaky hand. Are our parents going to find out? You're all 18, Tony said. Legally adults. But I'd recommend telling them yourselves before they get the mail. Margaret looked up, her face pale. My mom's going to kill me. Should have thought of that before you decided to go camping in a restricted area, I said, my voice harder than I intended. Miles folded his citation into a paper airplane. Still doesn't explain why you freaked out about that door. What's in there anyway? I only got a few feet in before we headed back to camp. My stomach twisted. You went inside? Just a little ways. It was dark and we didn't have good flashlights. He shrugged. Planned to go back today and check it out properly. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. That area is restricted for a reason. There are unstable geological formations, sinkholes, and cave systems that haven't been properly mapped. People have gotten lost and died in there. The lie came easily, but Miles didn't look convinced. Right. That's why there's a little hobbit door built into a tree. Makes perfect sense. Miles, Jacqueline whispered. Just stop. I gathered their IDs from my desk. You're free to go. Stay out of restricted areas. If we catch you there again, the consequences will be much more severe. They filed out one by one. Oliver and Margaret mumbled apologies. Jacqueline gave a small nod. Miles paused at the door. Whatever you're hiding out there, he said, must be pretty interesting. After they left, Tony waited about 3 seconds before turning to me. So, what was that about? Nothing. I started organizing the paperwork, avoiding his eyes. Dallas, I've worked with you for 4 years. I've never seen you react like that to anything. It's complicated. Try me. I shook my head. Not now, Tony. I need to finish this report. He watched me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But if there's something dangerous out there, the rest of us should know. I'll handle it, I said. After Tony left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the wall. The door was open. After all these years, the door my father had warned me about, the door I'd avoided my entire adult life, was standing open. And a teenage boy had crawled inside. I needed to report this to Landon. The chief ranger should know what was happening in his park. But what would I say? That I was terrified of a small wooden door because my dad told me to stay away from it when I was 12? That I'd been avoiding a section of the park for over 20 years because of a childhood scare? Or I could go back and close it myself. Seal it somehow. Make sure no one else could open it again. I picked up the phone and dialed my father's number in Arizona. It rang 6 times before he answered. Dallas, everything okay? His voice sounded scratchy with sleep. Sorry to wake you, Dad, I said. I need to ask you something. What's going on? I took a deep breath. The door, in the big Douglas fir near Timber Creek. The silence that followed lasted so long I thought we'd lost connection. Dad? Who opened it? His voice had changed, grown tighter. Some kid trespassing in the park. I found it open today. Did you look inside? The question came quick, urgent. No, but the kid said he went in a little ways. Another long pause. If it's open, close it. Don't look inside. Dad, I need more than that. What is it? What's behind that door? Not over the phone. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Just close it, Dallas, and make sure it stays closed. But I mean it. Close it and stay away. I'll call you tomorrow. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, frustration building in my chest. 22 years. and he still couldn't give me a straight answer. I finished my reports and drove home in a daze. My small cabin sat at the edge of the ranger housing area, surrounded by pine trees. Usually, the familiar setting calmed me after a long day. Tonight, every shadow seemed deeper, every rustle in the trees more ominous. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed in bed, my mind replaying the image of that open door, the darkness beyond it. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with narrow tunnels and damp earth. I crawled through darkness, my hands and knees scraping against dirt and roots. Behind me, something moved. Something with too many legs, making a dry, skittering sound as it followed. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it getting closer, feel its breath on my neck. I woke, gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. The bedroom was still dark. The clock read 4:17. No point trying to sleep again. I showered, made coffee, and sat on my porch, watching the sky lighten. Birds began their morning songs, but they didn't ease my mind like they usually did. All I could think about was the door, standing open like a wound in the forest floor. My phone rang just after 7. I didn't recognize the number. Ranger Barnes speaking. "This is Alice Finley." A woman's voice, tight with worry. "Miles's mother. He didn't come home last night." My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hand. "Ms. Finley, the other kids said they all left the ranger station together. Oliver said Miles was talking about going back to look at something they found. His car is gone. He's not answering his phone, and he never came home." The nightmare flashed through my mind. Dark tunnels, skittering sounds. "Ms. Finley, when exactly did you last hear from him?" "Yesterday afternoon. He texted saying he'd be home for dinner." Her voice cracked. "His car is missing. I called his friends, but they don't know where he is. I'm worried he went back to the park." I closed my eyes. I knew exactly where Miles had gone. Back to the door. Back to whatever waited behind it. "I'll look for him," I said. "Can you describe his car?" I slammed the phone down and grabbed my gear without hesitation. Miles Finley had gone back to the door. The same door my father had pulled me away from 22 years ago with terror in his eyes. The same door that had haunted my dreams last night with skittering sounds and too many legs. "Damn it," I muttered, shoving extra batteries into my pack. I radioed Tony and Thelma as I headed for my truck. "Need you both to meet me at the Northwest Station entrance. Possible missing hiker situation." Tony responded first. "On my way. Who's missing?" "Miles Finley, one of the teenagers from yesterday. His mother called. He never made it home." Thelma's voice crackled through next. "I can be there in 15 minutes." I drove faster than I should have, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The morning sun filtered through the trees, but it did nothing to warm the cold dread spreading through my chest. Tony and Thelma were already waiting when I pulled into the gravel lot. Tony leaned against his truck, and Thelma stood nearby checking her equipment. "What's the situation?" Thelma asked as I approached. Her dark ponytail was pulled tight and her expression was all business. "Miles Finley, 18, last seen leaving the ranger station yesterday after we cited him and his friends for trespassing near Timber Creek." I took a deep breath. His mom called. He never came home, and his friends think he might have gone back to something they found in the restricted area. "The place you and I found them yesterday?" Tony asked, his brow furrowed. I nodded. "Yeah, we need to start at their campsite and work our way out." "Any idea what he went back for?" Thelma asked, adjusting her radio. I hesitated, the memory of the door flashing in my mind. "They found something they shouldn't have. Let's move." We took my truck to the closest access point, then hiked the rest of the way to the campsite. The forest felt different today, quieter, watchful, or maybe that was just my imagination working overtime. The campsite looked exactly as we'd left it yesterday, empty with flattened grass where the tents had been and a cold fire pit. No sign anyone had returned. "Let's spread out," I said. "Look for fresh tracks heading away from camp." We searched in widening circles. Tony found footprints heading toward the creek, but they were old, probably from when the teenagers were still camping. Thelma called out from the western edge of the clearing, "I've got fresh boot prints, single set, heading northwest." My stomach dropped. Northwest, toward the massive Douglas fir, toward the door. "That's him," I said. "Let's follow them." We tracked the footprints through the underbrush. They followed the same path Miles had led us on yesterday, straight toward the door. "Should we check the main trails first?" Thelma suggested. "Maybe he just cut through here to get back to his car." "Good point," I said. "Let's check the parking areas first." We diverted to the nearest official trailhead. Nothing. Then we hiked to the next closest one. Still no sign of Miles or his car. "There's an old fire road about half a mile east," Tony said. "People sometimes use it to sneak in, even though it's blocked off." The fire road was overgrown, with a rusted gate meant to keep vehicles out. But someone had driven around it, leaving fresh tire tracks in the soft earth. We followed the tracks to a small clearing where a blue Honda Civic sat parked under the trees. "That's Miles's car," I said, recognizing the description his mother had given me. "License plate matches what his mom told me." Thelma walked around the vehicle. "Engine's cold. Been here a while." I looked at the surrounding forest, then back at the car. "He came back yesterday, right after leaving the station." Tony checked inside the car through the windows. Nothing inside except some empty energy drink cans and fast food wrappers. My worst fears were confirmed. Miles had returned to the door, just as I'd suspected. "We need to head back to the Douglas fir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's where he was going. We hiked back to Timber Creek Trail, following it northwest. With each step, the knot in my stomach tightened. The forest grew denser around us, the canopy blocking more and more sunlight until we walked in a perpetual twilight. "What exactly are we looking for?" Thelma asked. "You never really explained what those kids found." I kept my eyes on the trail. "It's complicated." "Dallas," Tony said, his voice firm. "You've been acting strange since yesterday. What's going on? What did those kids find that's got you so worked up?" I stopped walking and faced them. There's a door, built into the base of a massive Douglas fir. It's been there for decades, at least. My father showed it to me when I was 12 and told me never to go near it again. They stared at me, waiting for more. "Miles opened it," I continued, "and now he's missing." "A door?" Thelma repeated. "Like a maintenance access or something." "No," I said. "It's something else. You'll see." We continued in silence after that. As we approached the area where the Douglas fir stood, I felt my heart racing. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. And then we saw it. The massive Douglas fir towered above us, its trunk wider than any other tree in the forest. At its base, the small wooden door stood ajar, just as Miles had left it. Dark symbols carved into the wood seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. "What the hell?" Thelma whispered. Tony approached the door slowly. "I've patrolled this area for years. How have I never seen this before?" "People don't notice it unless they're looking for it," I said, though I had no idea if that was true. Or unless they stumble right onto it, like Miles did. I moved closer, pulling my flashlight from my belt. Cold air flowed from the opening, carrying that same musty smell I'd noticed yesterday. I knelt down and shined my light inside. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel descending at a shallow angle into the earth. The walls were packed dirt reinforced with roots and what looked like some kind of resin. Strange markings covered the surfaces, symbols similar to those on the door, but more elaborate, more numerous. "Miles!" I called into the opening. My voice echoed briefly, then seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. No response. "We need to go in after him," Tony said, already removing his backpack to grab his own flashlight. "I'll go first," Thelma offered, kneeling beside me. I stood up and blocked them both. "No, I'm going in alone." "That's not protocol," Thelma argued. "We never split up during search and rescue." "This isn't standard search and rescue," I said firmly. "I need you both to stay here." Tony crossed his arms. "Why? What aren't you telling us?" I checked my equipment. Flashlight, backup flashlight, extra batteries, first aid kit, water, energy bars, knife, rope. My father warned me about this place for a reason. I don't know what's down there, but I'm not risking both of you too. "That's ridiculous," Thelma said. "We're trained for this." "Not for this," I insisted. "No one's trained for this." I could see the concern and confusion on their faces, but I held firm. "I need you both to stay here. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, call for backup, but do not, I repeat, do not, follow me inside, no matter what you hear." "Dallas, this is crazy," Tony said. "At least take a radio." I clipped my radio to my belt, though I doubted it would work underground. 30 minutes. That's it. If I'm not back, call Chief Landon and tell him everything. Before they could argue further, I knelt down in front of the door. The cold air brushed against my face like a warning. "Be careful," Thelma said quietly. I nodded, then got down on my hands and knees and began crawling into the tunnel. The passageway was narrow, but just wide enough for me to move through comfortably. The packed earth felt cool and slightly damp under my palms. My flashlight beam bounced ahead of me, illuminating about 10 feet of tunnel at a time. As I crawled deeper, childhood fears came rushing back. The nightmares I'd had after my father pulled me away from this place. The way his hands had shaken when he made me promise never to return. The tunnel descended gradually, curving slightly to the left. The air grew colder with each foot I traveled, and that musty smell intensified, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Something organic and alien. My flashlight beam played across the walls, revealing more of those strange markings. They seemed to cover every inch of the tunnel's surface in intricate patterns. When the light touched them, they appeared to pulse slightly, as if reacting to the illumination. I blinked, wondering if it was just my imagination or a trick of the shadows. The silence was absolute except for my breathing and the soft sounds of my movement. The tunnel seemed to absorb all other noise, creating a pocket of isolation that grew more complete the further I went. I kept crawling, pushing away thoughts of what might be waiting ahead. Miles was down here somewhere. That was all that mattered right now. But with each inch forward, the darkness pressed against me more heavily, and those strange markings on the walls continued their subtle, unsettling pulse whenever my light touched them. The tunnel widened gradually, and I kept crawling forward, my knees sore against the packed earth. After what felt like 20 minutes of continuous descent, the narrow passage suddenly opened up, and I found myself at the edge of something impossible. I crawled out onto a ledge overlooking a vast underground chamber. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. The space stretched out in all directions, far larger than any natural cave system should allow to exist beneath a forest. What struck me immediately was the light. There shouldn't have been any this far underground, yet the entire chamber glowed with a sickly, pulsing phosphorescence that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I stood up slowly, my muscles grateful to be free from the cramped tunnel. The air hit me like a physical force, thick, heavy, and carrying a stench that made me gag. It was the smell of rot and decay, but underneath was something else, something chemical and alien that burned my nostrils and made my eyes water. I pulled my shirt collar up over my nose, but it did little to filter the assault. "Miles!" I called out, my voice small and immediately swallowed by the vastness around me. No echo returned. As my eyes adjusted to the strange light, I noticed movement in the shadows below. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks, creating patterns from the shifting phosphorescent glow. Then one of the shadows moved directly through a patch of light, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from shouting. It looked like an insect, but wrong. All wrong. The thing was the size of a large dog with a segmented body supported by too many jointed legs. Its carapace gleamed wetly in the glow, and as it moved, I heard the click, click, click of its mandibles working together in what sounded like communication. It wasn't alone. As I watched, I counted 5, then 8, then too many to keep track of, all moving across the chamber floor with purpose. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and scramble back up the tunnel. But Miles was down here somewhere. The thought of him encountering these creatures alone made my stomach turn. I swept my flashlight across the chamber, looking for a way down. About 20 feet to my right, I spotted what appeared to be a natural path, winding down from my ledge to the chamber floor. Taking a deep breath through my mouth to avoid the stench, I started making my way toward it. "Get it together," I whispered to myself. "You're a ranger. You've handled emergencies before." But nothing in my training had prepared me for this. Not for a vast, impossible space beneath the forest floor. Not for dog-sized insects with clicking mandibles. Not for the way the air itself felt wrong against my skin. Like it was touching me back. I reached the path and began my descent, keeping my back to the wall and my eyes on the creatures below. They didn't seem to notice me, or if they did, they showed no interest. Their chittering created a constant background chorus that made it hard to listen for any human sounds. "Miles!" I called again, louder this time. "Miles Finley, can you hear me?" The chamber swallowed my voice whole. The creatures below paused briefly at the sound, their antennae waving in my direction before resuming their activities. I reached the chamber floor and immediately felt disoriented. The phosphorescent light played tricks with depth perception. Walls that seemed close were actually distant, and what looked like solid ground sometimes wasn't. I tested each step carefully before committing my weight. "Miles!" I called again, my voice sounding flat and muffled in the thick air. I picked what looked like a clear path between clusters of the insect-like creatures, giving them a wide berth. They seemed more interested in whatever they were doing, gathering around fungal growths that pulsed with the same sickly light as the walls, than in me. Still, I kept my knife in hand, though I doubted it would do much against their armored bodies if they decided I was a threat. The chamber floor wasn't flat, but undulated in gentle slopes and dips. Strange formations rose from the ground, some like stalagmites, others more organic, like massive mushrooms or coral growths. The farther I ventured from the entrance, the more alien the landscape became. Crystalline structures jutted from the walls, catching and refracting the phosphorescent glow into prismatic patterns. Fungal growths formed complex branching networks that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I checked my watch to see how long I'd been down here, but the display showed impossible numbers, the digits shifting and changing as I watched. My phone was the same. The screen displayed a jumble of symbols rather than the time. Even my sense of time felt wrong. Had I been walking for minutes or hours? The steady rhythm of my footsteps and the constant chittering of the creatures blended into a hypnotic backdrop that made it impossible to tell. "Miles!" I shouted, fighting against the growing sense that I was becoming lost in this impossible space. "Miles Finley!" I tried to maintain a straight path, using distinctive formations as landmarks, but the environment seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. A crystalline spire I'd used as a marker would be slightly different when I looked back. Its angle changed, or its color shifted. The clicking sounds of the creatures grew louder in some areas, forcing me to change direction several times. I skirted the edge of what looked like a colony of the things, gathered around a pulsing mound of fungal matter, their mandibles working frantically as they tore pieces away. My training kept me moving forward methodically, but it was fighting a losing battle against the primal fear building in my chest. This place shouldn't exist. Couldn't exist. Yet here I was, breathing its toxic air, navigating its impossible geography. I paused to take a drink from my water bottle, and the simple, normal action helped ground me. I was still Dallas Barnes, still a ranger, still on a search and rescue mission. I had to find Miles and get us both out of here. As I put the bottle back in my pack, my flashlight beam caught something in the distance that didn't match the organic patterns around me. Something with structure and purpose. I moved toward it, picking my way carefully around a field of crystal formations that hummed when I passed too close. As I got nearer, the object resolved into a massive web-like structure spanning a section of the chamber anchored to the walls and ceiling. But this wasn't a spider's web. The strands were thick and translucent, pulsing with the same phosphorescence as everything else in this place. They formed an intricate pattern that my eyes couldn't quite follow. It seemed to shift and change even as I stared at it. The web spanned at least 30 feet across and rose nearly to the ceiling of the chamber, which must have been 50 feet high in this section. My flashlight beam played across the massive structure, and I saw that things were embedded within it. Some looked like bundles of organic matter. Others had more distinct shapes. I moved closer, drawn by a terrible curiosity, and the desperate hope that I might find Miles. The web dominated this section of the chamber, and as I approached, the chittering of the insect creatures grew quieter, as if even they avoided this area. As I got closer to the web-like structure, details became clearer in the sickly glow of the chamber. The strands weren't just pulsing, they were moving with subtle, rhythmic contractions, like a circulatory system pumping something through its network. I kept my knife ready, trying to steady my breathing as I approached. My flashlight beam caught something embedded in the central part of the web, something that didn't belong in this alien landscape. A splash of bright color against the translucent material, blue fabric, a jacket, an expensive one. "Miles?" I called out, my voice barely carrying in the thick air. That's when I saw him. Miles Finley hung suspended about 15 feet up in the web, partially encased in the viscous, translucent material. His body was spread-eagled, arms and legs held fast by thick strands that seemed to have hardened around his limbs. The substance covered most of his body but left his face partially exposed. He was alive. His eyes were wide open, bulging with pure terror and agony. His mouth worked frantically, trying to scream through the film of material that partially covered his lips. Only muffled, desperate sounds escaped. Wet, choking noises that made my skin crawl. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths, and tears streamed down his face, cutting clean tracks through the grime and sweat. I took an instinctive step forward, raising my knife, though I had no idea how I could possibly reach him, let alone free him. That's when I noticed it wasn't just the web holding Miles. Something stood on a thick strand next to him, something that had been perfectly still until now. The creature towered at nearly 8 feet tall, its body a nightmarish collection of too many limbs arranged in ways that made no anatomical sense. Its skin was a pale, mottled color that reminded me of cave fish or fungi that grow in darkness, never touched by sunlight. Each of its multiple limbs ended in sharp, elongated claws that looked like they could slice through bone. But it wasn't attacking Miles, not in any way I could understand. The creature had positioned itself over the teenager, its body arched above him. From where I stood, I could see it was feeding, not tearing flesh or drinking blood, but extracting something else entirely. Luminescent wisps, like glowing smoke or liquid light, flowed from Miles's body into the creature's form. With each extraction, Miles's body convulsed, and his eyes rolled back momentarily before snapping forward again with renewed terror. Whatever it was taking from him, it was causing him unimaginable pain. My flashlight beam wavered as my hand trembled. The light caught the creature's face, and I nearly dropped the flashlight completely. Its face was a grotesque mockery of human features, as if something had studied human anatomy through distorted photographs and tried to recreate it with entirely wrong materials. The proportions were wrong, the placement unnatural, but worst of all were its eyes, black, multifaceted like an insect's, reflecting my flashlight beam back at me in dozens of tiny pinpoints of light. I couldn't move. My body refused to respond as understanding crashed over me in waves of nausea. This was why my father had been so terrified. This was why he made me promise never to look at the door, never to touch it, never to speak of it. He had seen this. He had known what lived beneath the forest floor. The creature paused in its feeding, its head swiveling toward me with a series of clicking sounds. Those black, multifaceted eyes fixed on me, studying me with alien intelligence. I waited for it to lunge, to attack, to add me to its web, but it didn't. After a moment of observation, it simply turned back to Miles and resumed feeding, drawing more luminescent wisps from his body. Miles convulsed again, his muffled screams renewing with fresh agony. The creature hadn't attacked because it didn't see me as a threat, or maybe it just wasn't finished with its current meal. My survival instinct finally kicked in, overriding the paralysis of terror. I began backing away, keeping my eyes on the creature and Miles. Each step felt like moving through molasses, my body fighting against the impulse to turn and run blindly. As I retreated, my flashlight beam swept across more of the chamber walls, and I noticed what I'd missed before. The web wasn't just in this one location. It extended throughout the chamber, with dozens of similar cocoons embedded in the walls and ceiling. Some contained bundles I couldn't identify, but others held what were unmistakably human remains. Bodies in various stages of decomposition, some fresh enough to recognize as human, others so degraded they were little more than skeletal fragments held together by the web's material. A few still wore tattered clothing or had personal items stuck in the hardened substance around them. How many years, decades, had this been happening? How many missing hikers had actually ended up here, feeding this thing while search parties combed the forest above? Human voice. I clawed my way through the tunnel, my hands and knees scraping against dirt and roots as I scrambled upward in blind panic. My flashlight beam bounced wildly off the walls, creating a strobe-like effect that made the carved symbols seem to dance and reach toward me. My lungs burned with each desperate breath of the thick, foul air that clung to me like a second skin. Something moved behind me in the darkness, a clicking, skittering sound that grew closer with each passing second. I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. My entire body screamed at me to keep moving, to escape whatever horror might be following me from that impossible chamber. The sound came again, closer this time. My fingers dug deeper into the earth as I pulled myself forward with renewed desperation, my muscles screaming in protest. After what felt like hours but must have been minutes, a faint glow appeared ahead, natural light filtering through the open doorway. I lunged toward it with the last reserves of my strength, practically throwing myself through the small wooden door and out into the forest. I collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for clean air, my chest heaving. The sensation of normal oxygen filling my lungs felt almost painfully sweet after the putrid atmosphere below. "Dallas! Jesus, what happened?" Tony's voice cut through my panic. I rolled over to see Tony and Thelma standing over me, their faces tight with concern. Tony reached down to help me up while Thelma scanned the forest behind me, her hand hovering near her sidearm. "You've been down there for 23 minutes, Thelma said, checking her watch. We were about to call it in. "Did you find Miles?" Tony asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Was he down there? What's in that tunnel?" Their questions hit me like physical blows. Miles, the web, the creature, the luminescent wisps being pulled from his body while he silently screamed, the dozens of other cocoons with their partially decomposed remains. The truth crashed over me in waves, threatening to drown me in its horror. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? The chamber defied all natural laws. The creatures existed beyond any known taxonomy. The feeding process I'd witnessed violated everything I understood about life and death. The tunnel. I started, my voice hoarse. My mind raced for something, anything, that would make sense to them. It collapsed after about 20 feet in. There was nothing there, no sign of Miles. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. Collapsed, Tony repeated, his brow furrowing. But you were gone for over 20 minutes. I wiped dirt from my face, using the moment to compose myself. I tried to dig through, thinking Miles might be trapped on the other side, but it was no use. The whole thing is unstable. Thelma looked at the door, which remained open. Should we seal this off, if it's dangerous? Yes, I said too quickly. We need to close it, now. Together, we pushed the small wooden door shut. It closed with surprising ease, the symbols seeming to align perfectly with indentations in the tree bark. Once closed, the door blended so seamlessly with the trunk that even knowing exactly where it was, I had trouble distinguishing its outline. I've never seen anything like this, Tony said, running his fingers over the bark where the door had been. How long has this been here? Decades, I answered truthfully. My father showed it to me when I was a kid. And you think Miles came back here after we sighted him? Thelma asked. I nodded. His car's here. He must have. But if he's not in the tunnel, where did he go? Tony asked. I shook my head. I don't know. Maybe he came here, found the door, but went somewhere else in the park afterward. We hiked back to the ranger station in uncomfortable silence. With each step, I felt the weight of my deception growing heavier. Miles wasn't lost in the forest. He wasn't hiking on some unmarked trail. He was suspended in that web, being fed upon by something that shouldn't exist, and I had left him there. The official search for Miles Finley began that afternoon. Teams of rangers and local volunteers combed the trails, checked every campsite, and scoured the park boundaries. I participated in these searches, leading teams through areas I knew Miles wouldn't be found, all while the truth burned inside me like acid. 3 days into the search, Detective Jimmy Silva from the county sheriff's office arrived to interview everyone who had last seen Miles. He was a compact man with alert dark eyes that seemed to catalog every micro-expression and hesitation. We sat in Chief Landon's office, a small tape recorder between us on the desk. Walk me through your interactions with Miles Finley, Silva said, his pen poised over his notepad. I recounted finding the teenagers camping illegally, issuing citations and escorting them back to the ranger station. And you believe he returned to the park afterward? Silva asked. His car was found on an old fire road, I said. So yes, he came back. Did he mention any specific plans or areas he wanted to explore? The memory of Miles talking about the door flashed in my mind. His cocky smile, his paper airplane citation, his promise to return with better equipment. He was interested in the northwest section, I said carefully. But we searched that area thoroughly. My best guess is he left through one of the unmanned exits on the east side. There are several hiking trails that connect to public roads. Silva's pen stopped moving. That's quite a distance from where his car was found. Miles struck me as impulsive, I said. Maybe he met someone, got a ride, decided to leave his car behind. Even to my own ears, the explanation sounded weak. Silva studied me for a long moment. Ranger Barnes, is there anything else you think I should know? Anything that might seem insignificant to you but could help us locate this young man? Yes, I wanted to scream. There's a door in a Douglas fir that leads to a chamber filled with monsters. They're feeding on Miles right now, extracting some kind of essence from him while he's conscious and aware. I left him there because I was terrified, because I couldn't save him, because what I saw can't exist in the world as we understand it. No, I said instead. Nothing else. The interview ended, and Silva left with promises to return if they developed new leads. I walked back to my cabin that evening with my false testimony replaying in my mind. That night, the nightmares began. I saw Miles suspended in the web, his eyes wide with terror, silently begging for help. I saw the creature feeding on him, drawing those luminescent wisps from his body. I saw the dozens of other victims throughout the chamber, some fresh, some reduced to skeletal remains. I woke up drenched in sweat, my throat raw from screaming. The nightmares returned every night, each more vivid than the last. During the day, I went through the motions of my job, leading searches, filing reports, maintaining trails, but everything felt hollow, meaningless. How could I care about campfire violations or trail maintenance when I knew what lurked beneath the forest floor? A week after Miles disappeared, I found myself standing at my bathroom sink at 3 a.m, splashing cold water on my face after another nightmare. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the haunted man staring back at me. Dark circles underlined bloodshot eyes. My skin had taken on a sickly pallor. Was it real? The question had started to gnaw at me during my waking hours. Could what I'd seen actually exist? Or had I experienced some kind of breakdown, projecting childhood fears into a hallucination? The tunnel was real. Tony and Thelma had seen it. But the chamber, the creatures, the feeding process. I remembered my father's reaction when I called him about the door. His fear had been real, palpable. He knew something. But was it the same thing I had seen, or was it just his own childhood terror passed down to me? Each day at the park became increasingly unbearable. Every tree seemed to hide secrets. Every shadow held potential horrors. The weight of my knowledge, or madness, pressed down on me until I could barely function. The lies I'd told to Tony, Thelma, Chief Landon, Detective Silva, and Miles's desperate mother compounded my guilt until it became a physical presence, a stone in my stomach that grew heavier with each passing day. And beneath it all was the certainty that the door remained, sealed for now, but still there, waiting, with Miles and all the others trapped on the other side. I stared at the leave request form on my desk, the words blurring together as I read them for the 5th time. 2 weeks had crawled by since Miles Finley disappeared, since I'd seen things no human should ever see. My hand shook as I signed my name at the bottom of the page. I walked down the hall to Chief Landon's office, my boots heavy on the worn linoleum. The door was open. Landon sat at his desk reviewing trail maintenance reports, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Got a minute?" I asked. He looked up, his expression shifting from concentration to concern when he saw my face. "Come in, Dallas. You look like hell." I handed him the form. "I need some time off." He glanced at the paper, his eyebrows rising when he saw I'd requested 6 weeks of accumulated leave. 6 weeks? That's unusual. He set the form down and studied me. "This about the Finley kid?" "Among other things." I couldn't meet his eyes. "Search efforts are ongoing. Detective Silva's team is still..." "I know. I just need some time away." Landon leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under his weight. "I've been doing this job a long time, Dallas. I've seen how missing persons cases can affect rangers, especially when it's a kid." I said nothing. What could I say? That I knew exactly where Miles was but couldn't tell anyone? That I'd lied to everyone? To him, to Silva, to Miles's mother? "Take the time," Landon said finally, signing the form. "But consider talking to someone while you're gone." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I turned to leave, he added, "The door's always open if you need to talk." The irony of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. Doors. Some doors should never be opened. Back at my cabin, I packed mechanically. Clothes in a duffel bag, toiletries, a few books I knew I wouldn't read, my fishing gear. Everything I owned fit into the back of my truck with room to spare. I stood in the empty cabin looking at the bare walls, the stripped bed. I'd lived here for years, but it had never felt less like home. I knew I wasn't coming back. Not to this cabin, not to this job, not to this park that now felt like a prison of secrets. There was one last thing I needed to do before I left. I drove to the northwest section, parking at the old fire road where they'd found Miles's car. The hike to the Douglas Fir took 20 minutes. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, my body fighting against returning to that place. The massive tree stood exactly as it had 2 weeks ago, ancient and imposing against the backdrop of smaller pines. But something was different. I approached cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest. The door was gone. I ran my hands over the bark where it had been. Nothing. No seam. No outline. Not even the faintest trace of the symbols that had covered it. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have sworn it had never existed. I stepped back, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead despite the cool air. The door was sealed. But for how long? And what if someone else found a way to open it? Should I mark the tree somehow? Leave a warning? Who would believe me? What would I say? That there was a door to another world beneath this tree? That monsters lived there, feeding on humans? That Miles Finley and countless others before him had fallen victim to creatures that shouldn't exist? They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd investigate and maybe find a way to open the door again. No. Better to let the forest keep its secrets. Better to carry this burden alone than risk someone else opening that door. I walked back to my truck in silence, the weight of knowledge pressing down on me with each step. As I drove away from the park, I pulled out my phone and called my father. This time he answered on the second ring. "Dallas? What's wrong?" "I saw it, Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I saw what's behind the door." Silence stretched between us for so long I thought we'd lost the connection. "Dad? Where are you now?" His voice sounded different, older, more fragile. "Leaving the park. For good." He let out a long, shaky breath. I prayed you'd never have to know." "Know what? What the hell is that thing? Those creatures, the webs?" "Your grandfather showed me that door when I was 23, he said. "Just like I showed you, though I never meant for you to see what was inside. The Rangers found it in 1897, been protecting it ever since." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Protecting it? Or hiding it? Both. "Some doors are boundaries between worlds," my father said, his voice breaking. "And some secrets are burdens passed down through generations." I watched the park boundary sign appear in the distance, growing larger as I approached. "I couldn't save him, Dad. The kid. Miles. He was still alive when I found him, but I couldn't. You can't save them once they're taken." My father's voice was gentle but firm. "You can only try to prevent others from being taken." I crossed the boundary line, the sign flashing past my window. The forest receded in my rearview mirror, but I knew it would never truly be behind me. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You live with it," my father said. "Just like I did. Just like your grandfather did." I ended the call and kept driving, uncertain of my future, but certain of one thing. I could never unsee what lurked beneath the trees. I sat on the deck of a 32-foot charter boat, watching the morning sun catch on the waves as my client reeled in his third base of the day. The salt air filled my lungs, a welcome change from the pine-scented wind I'd known for most of my life. The constant rhythm of the waves against the hull had become my metronome, marking time in a way that felt safer, more predictable than the shadows between trees. "Hell of a catch, Dallas," shouted Martin, a regular who drove up from Portland twice a month for these excursions. His face reddened with exertion as he fought the fish. "Keep the tip up," I called back, already reaching for the net. "Let the rod do the work." 6 months had passed since I'd left Cascade National Park. 6 months of building a new life in this small coastal town of Bayport, 300 miles from the forest and the things that lived beneath it. I'd found work as a fishing guide almost immediately. Turned out my years of backcountry knowledge translated well to reading water and weather. The tourists didn't care that I sometimes went quiet, staring at the tree line visible from shore. They just wanted fish, and I made sure they caught them. I helped Martin land the base, a decent 5-pounder that would make a good story back home. As I removed the hook, I noticed my hands were steady. They hadn't always been in those first weeks after leaving the park. "Think we can get a couple more before lunch?" Martin asked, already baiting his hook again. I nodded, checking my watch. Tide's still good for another hour. The work suited me. Out on the water, there were no dark spaces, no hidden corners. Everything was open, visible. The horizon stretched unbroken in every direction, and the only things beneath us were fish, normal, natural things that belonged in this world. When I returned to the harbor that afternoon, I cleaned the boat with mechanical efficiency, hosed down the deck, and stored the gear. My apartment waited a short walk away, a 1-bedroom unit above a tackle shop that smelled perpetually of fish bait and salt. The rent was reasonable, and the owner didn't ask questions about why I'd moved to town with no references and a haunted look in my eyes. I climbed the wooden stairs to my door, keys jingling in my hand. Inside, the apartment was sparse but functional. A futon couch, a small television I rarely watched, a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove. The only decoration was a framed photo of my father and me from when I was 10, standing proudly with fishing rods at a lake in the mountains. Before I knew about the door, my eyes drifted to the wall beside my bed, the one wall not visible from the doorway or windows. It was covered with newspaper clippings, printouts from local news websites, and maps, a collage of evidence I couldn't ignore despite my attempts to build a new life. 3 more disappearances at Cascade National Park, all within the last 4 months. All hikers last seen near Timber Creek Trail. The first had been a solo hiker, James Brennan, age 27. Experienced outdoorsman who'd told friends he wanted to explore some of the less traveled paths in the northwest section. The search lasted 2 weeks before being scaled back. Then the Watkins sisters, Ellie and Sarah, ages 24 and 22. They'd gone for a day hike and never returned to their campsite. Their car was found at a trailhead a mile from Timber Creek. Most recently, Omar Davidson, a wildlife photographer who'd been taking pictures in the park for an upcoming book. His editor reported him missing when he missed a deadline and stopped responding to messages. I'd followed each case obsessively, checking news sites daily, calling former colleagues under the pretense of catching up. Each time, the familiar pattern emerged. Extensive searches finding nothing. Theories about people wandering off trail, possibly falling into ravines or becoming disoriented. But I knew better. I knew exactly where they were. On my desk sat a stack of sealed envelopes. I'd written everything down. The door, the tunnel, the chamber beneath the Douglas fir, the creatures, miles in the web, all of it. I'd addressed them to Chief Ranger Landon Castillo, the regional FBI office, and 3 journalists known for investigating environmental stories, but I couldn't bring myself to mail them. Who would believe me? And if someone did believe me enough to investigate, would they open the door again? I showered, washing away the day's accumulation of fish scales and bait residue, then heated leftover pasta on the stove. As I ate, I stared at the wall of clippings, tracing the patterns I'd marked in red pen. The disappearances were happening more frequently now. Whatever lived beneath the trees was growing hungrier. My phone rang at 11:37 that night. I'd been lying awake listening to the distant sound of waves against the seawall. The screen showed a number I recognized instantly, though I hadn't seen it in 6 months. "Thelma?" I answered, sitting up in bed, my heart already accelerating. "Dallas." Her voice was tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of fear I'd never heard from her before. "I'm sorry to call so late." "What's wrong?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. "There's something happening at the park," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The door is open again." The room seemed to tilt around me. "What door?" I asked, playing dumb even as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. "Don't," she snapped. "The door you lied about, the one by Timber Creek, the one that doesn't collapse after 20 feet. I closed my eyes. "How do you know?" "Because I followed you that day," she admitted. "Not into the tunnel, but I saw enough. I've been watching that tree for months. The door reappeared 3 days ago, and now it's open. Have you told anyone else?" "No. Tony transferred to Yellowstone 2 months ago. Landon wouldn't believe me without proof. And I'm not going in there alone." She paused. "Dallas, 4 people have gone missing." "I know," I said, looking at my wall of clippings. "I've been keeping track." "Then you know you need to come back." I stood up, phone pressed to my ear, and walked to my closet. "I'll be there by morning." "Thank you," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I'll meet you at the Northwest Station entrance at 7. I ended the call and pulled out my duffel bag, the same one I'd packed 6 months ago when I left. Some part of me had known this day would come, that the distance I'd put between myself and the forest was only temporary. I packed quickly: clothes, first aid kit, flashlight, extra batteries. I added a hunting knife I'd bought in town, larger than my old ranger knife. I wasn't sure if it would make any difference against the creatures, but it felt better than going in unarmed. Before leaving, I looked at the envelopes on my desk. I'd written them as a confession, an attempt to share the burden of knowledge. But now I understood they were something else, a contingency plan. I placed them in my bag alongside everything else. The coastal highway was empty at midnight. My headlights cut through the darkness as I headed east, away from the ocean and toward the mountains. The radio stayed off. I needed to think. As the miles passed, I considered what awaited me. The door had reappeared and opened again. More people had been taken. Whatever lived beneath the Douglas fir was active once more. My father's words came back to me. Some doors are boundaries between worlds. He'd carried this knowledge for decades before passing it to me, just as his father had done before him. A generational burden, he'd called it. I understood now why he'd stayed at the park for 30 years. It wasn't just a job, it was a vigil. He hadn't been a ranger so much as a guardian watching over that.